You're listening to Contesting Wrestling. Hello, everybody. My name, as usual, is Doc Diamondfire. We're here for another heavy analysis of something that happened long, long ago. Let me throw it right to Professor Benjamin Abelson. You wanna tell us what we're doing today and introduce our guest?
Yeah, Dr. Ben Abelson here, professor of philosophy at Mercy College and longtime analyzer of professional wrestling. And I am extremely happy today that we are joined by my very dear friend who is largely responsible for my getting into indie wrestling in the early 2000s. And we're going to talk a lot about that. Zac Pond, welcome to Contesting Wrestling. Thanks for being here.
Hey, no problem, man. I'm glad that you guys decided to have me on. And yeah, going through these matches and everything really brought up a lot of the memories of first getting into Ring of Honor and seeing like a new generation of talent, pardon the pun from the new generation, but it was so exciting to see something else and see something different. Kind of like felt like being let in on a little secret, but I'm glad that you guys invited me and have a chance to reminisce.
Awesome. Yeah, so today is going to be the first of our series of episodes about the career of one CM Punk. And I had just texted Doc earlier in the week, like, hey, this is great timing. He just won the AEW title. It's another summer of Punk. We're going to be doing the summer of Punk this summer. And then, alas, it turns out he's injured and he's not going to be wrestling probably for most of the summer. Though that was actually the case with the last summer of Punk as well. So it's not quite as apropos as perhaps we wanted it to be, but we're still gonna go through with the plan. And we brought Zac on to talk about the earliest part of CM Punk's career in the indies, in places like IWA Mid-South, Ring of Honor, and unfortunately NWA-TNA.
So the TNA match, I felt dumber after watching, but we'll get there. To kind of frame everything, Zac, you brought up immediately the real point to begin with this was something new and different at the time. All of the wrestling that was through the Monday Night Wars era of wrestling in America sort of had the same origin point. It was still the overarching story of like the NWA and its offshoots and the WWF, which was one of those offshoots and everything, all the way through ECW. And then all of a sudden there was almost none of that. It all just came... it all crunched into the WWF, which turned into the WWE. Anything else that happened outside was going to be new. And that's where the American indie scene started really taking off. Fans were looking for a real alternative. ECW was gone, and you could only be the alternative for so long. Like, they weren't even that much of the alternative anymore. They were just ECW. And, yeah, that brings us to where we are now.
Now, before we get into all that, Zac, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself as a fan, when you started watching wrestling, what your sort of favorite eras of wrestling are, etc.
Well, from as early as I can remember, I've always had wrestling around me. My family moved around a lot, and when I first started having real memories is when I lived in Dallas, Texas. My dad's hobby was TV. So he got the biggest cable package he possibly could at the time, which had ESPN as a fledgling network, and then a couple other local sports affiliates. So we would see, WWF. You would see the promotions that had the Von Erichs and Funks in it, which I would have to believe at the time would have been what, WCCW, or no, that was
World Class.
When was this?
This would have been like 86 through 88.
Yeah, that would have
World
been
Class was still there, yeah.
And
right. AWA maybe?
Possibly.
Well, you said this was on ESPN?
Well, Global Championship Wrestling would be on there, but that would come later. But this is like local affiliate stuff that was filling in, which I had to assume the Funks or the Von Erichs were the biggest stars there. So I always remember seeing them. And my dad would tell me stories because the place he worked at, they would come in too often, and he had stories.
Wait a second. Where was it
Dallas.
Exactly that you were located?
Dallas, Texas.
What was the city? Dallas.
That was the Sportatorium.
Yep.
Yeah, that was WCCW's territory. Although if the Funks were the top guys, I would think Amarillo, because that was kind of a small territory that they dominated, but also in Texas.
It might have been local.
I could get into the, you could have been getting that TV if you don't know for certain. I find all of that endlessly fascinating.
So was that as big as like WWF where you were?
WWF still had a foothold there, but like the Von Erichs were like, they were like, if they came into the place my dad worked, and then the Dallas Cowboys came into the place my dad worked, they were on equal ground. Like,
wow.
Yeah.
Right.
People were fans of them. And I kept that with me when we finally settled in Long Island. Again, the dad's hobby is TV, sports in particular. So we got the biggest cable package again ever. And, I'd flip through the channels as a kid, and I found WCW. I was more into WCW as a kid than WWF. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, everyone was a little Hulkamaniac at one point, or is everybody like...
Were you a Stinger?
Actually, no. I always liked the High Flyers. Brian Pillman, Ricky Steamboat were my guys. And then eventually, as like Jushin Liger came in, I was like, "Yo, this Power Ranger's doing flips."
Yeah, check out this guy.
So you were like perfectly poised to be a Smart fan.
Yeah, I guess I was just a little snob from the start.
Yeah. You had the territory background. You liked the High Flyers, like.
And then, I mean, towards the end of the new generation, I kind of dipped out, as a kid. Other priorities took over. But then, in high school, I started getting back into it again because our local TV would carry ECW at like 2 a.m.
Right. If it was there, it might be 1, it might be 2, it might not be on that week.
This place, they had that like clockwork. And then before I left Long Island, they were actually showing episodes of HWA, which surprised the hell out of me.
Oh, wow. With like Nigel McGuinness and shit at the time?
This would have been 05, 06. So John Moxley, Sammy Callahan.
Yeah.
When Callahan was real young, real big.
So a little bit before that, in 2000, I believe it was the summer of 2003, I was visiting our mutual friend, Will Fink, who's been on this podcast, in East Hampton. And you and Will were buddies. And we'd go to your house and hang out in your basement and like play video games and smoke weed
and redacted. Yes.
And so during that particular summer, we had been hanging out for a couple of years at that point, since I guess Will started high school at East Hampton High, right? That
would have been 98.
Yeah. So I started coming out around then, and I remember meeting you pretty early on. So, but that summer in particular, I remember you introducing me to the world of indie wrestling. I had kind of not been watching as much wrestling for a few years, like at the end of the Attitude Era and stuff. I wasn't really into it. But I had started getting back into it at that point. And that summer, like, I think you had won whatever the SmackDown game was at the time and had a bunch of creator wrestlers, right? And you told me about Ring of Honor and TNA. And the 4 names I remember you telling me about from that time were Low Key, Paul London, AJ Styles, and The Amazing Red. And you showed me a bunch of their stuff. You also talked about how Raven was having this resurgence, which we'll get into a lot this episode.
Yeah.
I don't really remember you talking about CM Punk at the time. It wasn't until about a year later that CM Punk really came on me and Doc's radar. But tell us a little bit about how you got into that first wave of indie wrestling around that time.
So you mentioned SmackDown, which if you guys ever got really into making the creator wrestlers, the Game FAQ's message board, and I know there's probably a couple other ones, people would go back and forth discussing pro wrestling. So that was the place where you got to nerd out. And you'd have the guys that are like, oh, yeah, well, everything that's today isn't as good as, All Japan in the 90s or All Japan Women's
right.
or the best of the Super
Those guys are still saying those things exactly.
I mean, Yes.
They're not really wrong.
No.
Oh no, nothing against AJW or 90s All Japan, but like it reminds me of the guys that are still saying like we could only listen to the first like 3 or 4 Metallica albums. I'm like,
they're not
I mean,
wrong.
maybe,
No.
but it's 2022. Like, look at another thing.
I mean,
please.
the more apt comparison I think would be like Opeth's first couple albums, but yeah, I get what you mean there.
Hey man, that last album was dope.
It was good, but it's not a
Ben's
metal
a big
album.
Opeth
I
fan.
mean,
Fair.
so when are we gonna do contesting metal?
Oh yeah, we can get
boy.
Evan back for that one.
Yeah, there we are.
Oh yeah, well, I'm sure Evan would love to listen to a whole lot of metal in 2022. That sounds like exactly what he needs.
Oh, but I digress. I would start seeing these things people talking about. Well, you have to check out these guys here. I was like, I never heard of that company. So, being a permanently online kid and having a cable modem in the early 2000s was really advantageous because I could actually download video clips that weren't in the worst quality. I mean, not the best by today's standards, but you know, got to see little bits of Japan. Got to see a little bit of the weird deathmatch stuff out of there, and then we would see guys like Zero One was another company that I discovered.
I remember you showing me some CZW at the time as well, like the Cage of Death and Zandig and Lobo and all that shit.
Yeah, which was weird because I thought that was so different and so visually striking, and but like my guy there was Nick Mondo, and he was there for a second then gone, but I digress. But I would constantly see Ring of Honor was the big thing, and people were talking about Samoa Joe just destroying people. I was like, all right, I gotta check this out, and then. First match I saw, Paul London. That was my dude. Because whenever you're going into something blind, you always have that thing where you have that person that's your person, you know.
And I think by the time I got into there, and I was talking to you about it, London was already sort of on his way to WWE, so there was a lot of buzz around him at the time in that way, and people saying he's going to be the next Shawn Michaels and shit like that.
Yeah, we saw Paul London come into the WWE. We were like, oh, this guy's great. He's going to be a huge star. And then he wasn't.
No.
And we had never missed a call that far before. And it turns out it's because the WWE started falling off.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a more complicated story to tell there.
No, that's it.
London was not
London
the fit for the WWE at the time. Like, you know.
No, you're right. He wasn't. They were gassing up the entire roster to be 250-pound muscleheads again.
He was really talented. I mean, everything that he does, I mean, he stands out on. And I'll go out and say, anytime I can see Paul London, dude, I go out of my way to see him because it's like, one, that's rare, real rare. But two, I mean, he's got, you know, great charisma, fantastic in ring. Seems to, you know, have a thing about taking double stomps to the face, but you know, who doesn't?
So at this time, and so this is going back to what Doc was saying earlier, you know, we had this transition from ECW, and you know, indie wrestling was just ECW knockoffs pretty much until ROH came out. Would you agree? with that?
There was also there was also like just spot shows of smaller leagues trying to do independent, you know, one-offs. And there were a few like independent leagues, but they were essentially tiny territories that didn't have to support themselves.
Yeah, but like one of the things that really defined Ring of Honor was, even though they did have some hardcore stuff a little bit, they, you know, the code of honor and the emphasis on like pure technical scientific wrestling and the sort of cultural emphasis, which was really embodied by CM Punk on the like, we're not extreme anymore, right? We're not about like, you know, TNA, you know, we're not it's not about overt sexuality and like drug use and ultra violence and all this stuff. Like, that's not where the zeitgeist really was anymore. Like, the alternative thing to do was to be sober and like serious, you know, and monogamous even. And so where CM Punk like embodied that new kind of ethic, Raven was the perfect foil in being the embodiment of the older extreme alternative. And I think they did a really good job of presenting that. But Zach, for you, so when you were watching this as it was starting and CM Punk was coming out, like, how did you feel about that kind of, about Ring of Honor and that kind of change in aesthetic.
So the first Ring of Honor show I actually saw, I believe, was Death Before Dishonor 2, which had the Punk dog collar match. I was hyped to see it because I was a Hardy Boys mark when I started getting back into wrestling hardcore. It's because I was flipping on the channels and I see a neon dude running up doing ninja flips. I'm like, all right, this got my attention. And
I do remember you telling me about Jeff Hardy being in Ring of Honor and how badly that went.
Yeah, that is actually on that same show. If you ever want to see something like a nice time capsule of the era, that card has it all. I mean, Tom Carter had a match on there. You had that. You had Special K getting stomped out by Loki. Then you had Paul London versus Samoa Joe on there.
Yeah,
but
it's a great show.
Oh yeah, and just seeing stuff like that and seeing a different presentation, like they had the pads that were like the Japanese style all the way up versus the individual turnbuckles. Seeing the in-ring action being the focus of the storytelling versus antics going around it were the things that really drew me in and really stood out to me.
Gotcha.
Right. They wanted to do something different. And we were kind of saying it in different ways, but it's true because for so long in pop culture, especially in wrestling, the ideal had been like one thing that everybody was sprinting towards, but that goal had been achieved already. And it pushing past it only ended up with diminishing returns for a long time. So it was very smart for them to pivot and try and do something completely different.
Now, backing up a little bit, and really getting into the nitty-gritty about Punk here. So, Punk ended up being that kind of embodiment of what Ring of Honor was trying to do in a lot of ways. But it starts off in IWA Mid-South, right? Like that's where Punk really gets a name for himself, mostly in Louisville, Kentucky, where they would run in these tiny places. And so
they had distribution was the thing, Everybody knew that IWA Mid-South wasn't very good, but Smart Mark Video, the burgeoning Smart Mark Video, would be able to distribute all of their stuff. So you could get it if you wanted to from anywhere. People would start getting it. And you'd see these poorly lit, poorly shot shows with 12 to 30 people in the audience, and CM Punk was going to insult each of them individually.
Zach, did you see IWA Mid-South back then?
Yes. I kind of saw it as like, oh, this is like CZW. All right. I haven't seen enough deathmatch stuff in a while, but one of the things I look on later in life and look at is they gave a lot of young talent a lot of shots, mainly because they probably weren't getting paid, but that's besides the point.
We only became aware of them watching Jim Cornette's shoot interviews where he would talk shit about how they were driving wrestling out of the area.
Well, Cornette, for all of my gripes about him today, like he had a very good point, which was both IWA Mid-South and OVW were running the same area. And OVW was running like a family wrestling show that was trying to like be a traditional good guys and bad guys show, and IWA Mid-South was running blood and guts fuck you shows. And the state came down on wrestling because of what IWA Mid-South was doing, not because of what OVW was doing, but they weren't going to take the time to separate the two.
Sorry, Zach, I cut you off. Who were you saying came out of IWA Mid-South?
Well, I mean, for example, CM Punk, Chris Hero, Chuck Taylor, Ricochet are also two other names. And there's
Delirious and Matt Sydal.
Well, yes. I always thought that they were kind of more Northeast guys, though. I might be wrong on that.
No. They first made their names in IWA Mid-South, wrestling each other.
Fair enough. I want to say Jeff Cannonball too, but I'm probably not correct on that. They're this fucking shitty little, blood and guts hardcore promotion in Louisville, Kentucky, and they've got this guy who just fucking. So the first thing we watched for this episode was this video that's on YouTube called CM Punk People Person, and it's a compilation of his promos in IWA Mid-South, and he just really tears into people in a very like realistic kind of way where the people seem to get genuinely upset with him.
He's clearly aiming to offend as many of them as possible.
Yeah.
He's young and into wrestling, you know, in terms of this as much at this point, that I have no doubt that he wanted to start fights because he thought that would be heat.
Yeah.
Which is the kind of thing, hopefully, you grow out of. And he kind of did. But, yeah, that's what he was trying to get one of these people to attack him so he could beat the crap out of them and be like, see what happens when I'm better than you, you know?
And a couple of the women in the audience did try to attack him, and security held them back.
He inadvertently pointed out to me that they had, like, a fair amount of women in the IWA Mid-South audience because he insulted all of them.
Right.
In like, blatantly misogynistic manner. Like, there's no finesse to his act at this point. But all he was trying to do was piss everyone off, and he succeeded.
He was very good at that. I always thought that his, I mean, he was, you know, confident on the microphone before in the ring. And some of the things that I noticed, like, first off, like you said, the misogyny, some of the homophobia, just with tons of small children right there. Like,
right.
Then again, you know,
he's also not a fan of the Juggalos.
Yes. He ripped on one kid with a bowl cut who looked like the owner of the Vegas Raiders, Mark Davis.
Yeah.
I can't unsee the that one villain from Spawn, the ice cream man, too, when I see that. But
you know, and I feel like his feelings are real there. Like, he's straight edge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if he's really fucking straight edge, he is surrounded by fucking drunken, possibly meth using, you know, like,
you know. And at this point, he's
people.
What, 22?
Yeah. The people around him who he really was disgusted by, you know, and who he chose his lifestyle in order to not become, you know. So there's a lot of, you know, real honest vitriol in what Punk's doing there in Louisville. And it's what, you know, got him over. Eventually they loved him. Just like everywhere else he went, you know.
The other thing I noticed too, and I think this might have been a product of the time, is commentators talking over the promos and being so much louder than the promos because they were not mixing the audio whatsoever with those.
Well, the commentators were all trying to be like over the top, you know, radio DJ, smart, Mark, clever, because they could. Because they didn't have anybody producing them or pulling their reins back. Also, nobody that knew how to promote anything. So they were just trying to be outrageous. I'm sorry. When you want to...
I'm just assuming that they're the only guys that they had there, huh?
Right, you know, and even like Dave Prazak, who became an excellent commentator, would just do it like that then, because he didn't know what the hell he was doing.
I do.
Stark contrast to the Ring of Honor commentary, as we'll get to. Like the first 5 minutes of this first CM Punk Raven match is Gabe Sapolsky, as I think he was still calling himself Chris Lovey at this point, like hard selling without hard selling the RF Video Raven Shoot interview, which had just come out. Being like, you gotta hear this guy's stories from back when he was all messed up in ECW.
Well, he was doing Vince.
He was doing Vince.
He was totally doing Vince. Yeah. And
which is much more effective than doing stupid asshole.
Before we leave the promo thing though, I love how Punk claims that he invented the 3-way dance.
Why not? He'll lie. Just say it,
sure.
You know?
No, he lied all the time. There's another part where he's just like, yeah, no one's ever beat me. Like, no one's ever beat me. And the announcers are like, he just got pinned last week, you know? Excellent.
I like how at one point he was ripping on a guy who came to the show alone. That place was empty, and the guy at the commentary is like, no, we're happy he came. Come on, don't.
Right.
Well, no, the one guy on commentary, Prazak on commentary, is like, ha, he's such a loser. He doesn't have any friends. Ha, he came by himself. Ha.
Prazak was also Punk's manager whenever he could, you know.
So
the sleazy little fuck he was too.
But Punk got over enough there in IWA Mid-South that he became beloved, and he became the champion, and was got enough buzz that when they brought in fucking Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio, they had a triple threat match, or a 3-way dance as they called it, though it was one fall, between Punk, Eddie, and Rey at IWA Mid-South Spring Heat on March 2nd, 2002. And
yeah, there was some confusion with the announcers about that because, like, the three-way dance is a very specific ECW style three-way match where it's 2 falls. Not one fall to a finish.
Right.
It's someone gets eliminated, and one of the announcers thought that's what that meant, and then the other one's like, no, this is a 1-fall match. So that's
they didn't
not
know what was
what
going on.
you know. Yeah, it's that kind of detail work which separated IWA Mid-South from better leagues.
One of the announcers is Ace Steel, who trained CM Punk. I think he's the one who didn't know what was going on. But anyway, we get this match, and it's all three of these guys are in very interesting parts of their career. Rey has not yet debuted for WWE. He would soon after this. He is still wrestling without a mask.
Yeah.
He also seemed to have stolen Scott Steiner's chainmail headdress and was using it as a shirt, I noticed. Definitely a look.
It was also that weird period, I guess, especially for somewhere like IWA Mid-South, where whether you were a face or a heel or whatever, you had to be, like, lewd and obscene toward the crowd. Like, Rey gets up on the buckles and does the, like, fuck you gesture, the, like, up yours, slapping his bicep thing.
I really don't know.
But Eddie, who is just out of rehab at this point, also on his way back to WWE, he's really plays the heel in this match, as much as any of them does. Whereas Punk comes out with his 2 belts. I think he was also the Mid-American Wrestling Champion. He had just had this TLC match with Chris Hero, which was critically acclaimed, and the crowd was behind Punk in this one.
Yeah,
he was their guy.
How far out was that TLC match from this match?
It was very recent.
All right.
It was within the last several weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. Because one of the things I noticed was when they started going, first of all, the second Eddie Guerrero was out of the curtain, I mean, like, you saw that first step he took, he changed right there. Like, he has a very deliberate pacing walking to the ring. Like, he was stalking his opponents almost.
He was on a totally different. I mean, Rey obviously is great, but at that point, I think like he had, kind of lost himself, and Punk is still also finding his feet as a star. Eddie is just totally a star, with everything he does.
And you could tell in the sequences, like when it was just Guerrero and Mysterio. Like, they were just going through they could do that in their sleep. Punk, you always see him, like, reposition himself. I don't know if it's, like, nerves or maybe it's just, inexperience.
He was not totally smooth yet.
No.
He was not totally smooth yet.
That's one of the things I also like about indie wrestling. You get to see people on their come up and you get to see them evolve, time and time again. And there's every 5 to 10 years, there's always a new generation. You find that guy and bam.
So, Doc, you know something about... You told me something about them setting this match up, like Eddie wasn't going to get there till the last minute, so he had Punk put it together or something like that.
What was it? Yeah, I can't remember the exact detail, but one way or another, Punk had to put it together. Like, Eddie either wasn't, feeling like putting everything together, and they trusted Punk because they already knew him.
And you can see...
And Rey could plug his stuff into anything,
You can see Punk kind of talking Eddie through some things during this. And, for better or worse, Punk put it together, right? Like, it kind of tells a story. Like, at the beginning, you have Eddie, like, dodging the lockups. And then, Rey and Punk double team Eddie for a little while. And Eddie kind of outsmarts them. In a couple different places.
I wouldn't be surprised if they had Punk call it because they didn't want to do anything he couldn't do.
Possibly. Though Punk does some cool shit, man. He does a twisting second rope blockbuster at some point. I don't think I've seen him do that before or since in any match. There was some cool shit, but I would not agree with the announcer's assessment that, it was like, oh man, I got into Eddie Guerrero watching his matches with Dean Malenko, and this is just as good as those matches.
I had that note too, and then immediately after that, Eddie was going for a monkey flip and missed his footing on it.
Yes.
It's like when you're an announcer, it's okay to hype up what's happening, but you can't just blatantly lie to the people at home like that.
There was some cool spot. They got the whole stacked chin lock spot where they're all selling at once, and Mysterio, he's kind of invisible without his mask. It's weird.
Well, he's not the same.
Yeah.
There's a reason the WWE insisted he put it back on.
He does the 619 before it was called the 619. He kind of scrapes the top of Punk's head with it instead of nailing him in the face. He's still doing the Bronco Buster.
Right.
Oh man,
well, that was one of his big moves.
Great spot though, where he goes for it on Eddie, and Eddie puts his foot up, and Rey just bounces nuts first off of it.
That was the low blow to end all low blows. I mean, now they did make a note there that the ropes there were loose, and that was something I was always wondering. With shows where, I mean, you have ropes that are like that, you don't see people springboarding as much.
Yeah.
Or
Punk
like,
did, no.
an indie I went to up here, Seaway Valley Wrestling. They had pretty loose ropes for a show that up there that I went to, and only one guy would do springboards off of them, and he still looked pretty comfortable on it, but he would move to the center and kind of bend the top rope down to the second rope to get leverage. Do you guys see stuff like that ever, or?
Not much. I mean, usually I see ropes that are pretty tight. But yeah, it's definitely harder if the ropes are looser. But if you can get used to just about anything if you know what you're doing. I can imagine I can picture exactly what you're saying, where somebody took some loose ropes and used the middle, because that's probably where he could get the most balance after he knew what he was doing with them.
A lot of the modern luchadors will just springboard off the second into the ring, and it's even more impressive. So yeah, the match ends with Eddie kind of alley-ooping Rey into a top rope Rana on Punk, and then Eddie gets Rey out of the ring and hits the frog splash on Punk, and Eddie is the IWA Mid-South champion. I believe he lost it back to Punk the next night in a one-on-one match. I don't think I've ever actually seen that one-on-one match though. It's out there
on IWTV. Let's figure out the date on it.
Rey does a spin-a-rooney when he gets up.
I did see that. Sure. I did not know if that was just a thing he was trying out, or
I don't know. I mean, Doc, you've watched all that latter-day WCW. Did he start doing spin-a-roonies for some reason?
I'm honestly not sure. It's a lot of it blends together. Booker T was doing them, so I presume that Rey wasn't, and maybe he just started doing them on the indies.
Got you.
So he's like, well, Book's getting paid. What's he going to do, come after me? You know?
Right, yeah. I mean, well, it seems like the kind of thing that WCW did, where they would just steal everything and make it worse.
Like how the Disco Inferno's finish for a while was just doing the Stone Cold Stunner. He called it the Chart Buster.
We'll get to Disco Inferno later.
I thought that was just getting...
Yeah, you watch enough WCW Pro and you get those matches that Disco Inferno won. Yeah.
So shortly after this, Punk debuted in Ring of Honor, and fairly quickly started to work his way up the ranks, but he didn't really begin to stand out until this feud with Raven. And if you ask Punk, Raven did nothing for him. But I think that's pretty clearly untrue. I mean, I think even more than like making Punk into a star, this feud with Raven was really kind of the first marquee feud for ROH.
Yeah, definitely.
That got people really talking about it. And because it really was definitive of what was different about Ring of Honor, and putting the Ring of Honor style in stark contrast with the ECW style. Despite the fact that Raven is the babyface here.
Well, if you knew who Raven was and you didn't know anything about Ring of Honor or CM Punk, you knew his whole deal. And then if all you heard was, oh, he's feuding with this guy in this indie league, but this guy doesn't drink or do drugs and he's being a dick about it, you immediately understand the feud. Right. One of your old favorites. And the story at the time is like Raven cleaned up, which he proceeded to do a few times over the years. But it's like Raven cleaned up and this guy's being a dick to him about it. And maybe he'll beat up this young guy. And then you see what it's all about, and then you get hooked because it's good once you actually see the show.
So this is from ROH Expect the Unexpected. Thank you, Amazing Red. On March 15th, 2003. And it was Raven's ROH debut.
Yeah.
But, Punk knew the kind of wrestling that Raven did. He'd have his Ravens Rules matches, and this is indeed a Ravens Rules match. But Punk wanted a technical match. Punk had won a few matches leading up to this. Raven had recently put out an RF shoot interview that Doc alluded to earlier, and that Gabe Sapolsky on commentary mentions, where Raven went into detail about his drug use and his womanizing. So all of that would be, fresh in the minds of the ROH fans as well, because they all ate up these shoot interviews and things at the time.
And once again, if you hadn't seen any indie wrestling and you heard of this and you went to check it out, the announcers are pushing, oh, you like Raven? You want to hear Raven talk about all the crazy shit he did? Buy the tape. Right. We have it right here. All that stuff you heard about or just inferred, he'll tell you.
I mean, that worked for me and my brother.
Yeah.
I mean,
did you watch the Raven shoot around that time?
I watched it later, along with the Secrets of the Ring, which I thought was very, very well done. The way that he could talk about things and then explain, like, even the smallest minutia. When you see it, you're like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that dude understands wrestling. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so the match starts, and Punk tries to out-wrestle Raven and taunts him. But then Raven comes back, does some, high-flying stuff, and
he tried to hit a tornado, which I did not know that he could do that.
He didn't quite do it. He didn't quite tornado completely.
Listen,
but
right.
That's close enough for him, man. Give him
and
a break.
Gets on the mic and he's like, all right, now I've out-wrestled you, so now it's time for the plunder.
And becomes a Ravens Rules match.
Becomes a Ravens Rules match, but Punk tries to introduce the Sheriff first, and immediately turns into the bumbling heel who swings the chair and it hits the rope and slams back into his face before getting the advantage and starting the heat on Raven, beating the shit out of him with the chair.
And then they proceed to hit each other in the head with chairs and other objects for about another 15 minutes.
Yeah, Trinity's there. Remember Trinity?
Yeah.
Not from the Matrix.
Yep.
The wrestler Trinity.
No.
And she Punk beats the shit out of her, hits her with a forearm and throws her into the guardrail. They have those chain link guardrails.
I had that in the notes. Those guardrails probably not the best, because they're not going to protect the crowd. Definitely don't protect the wrestlers, and it looked like they were a pain in the ass to set up and take apart.
They were clearly held up by zip ties, which is very time consuming to put together.
Yes,
and flimsy.
But they were fine. That had the advantage that they could easily break the sections off and hit each other with them.
Right.
But the Trinity hits a moonsault on Punk, and then he the leg drops her through a table. That's it for Trinity.
Yeah, so the setup for Punk putting Trinity through the table is Trinity is standing in the corner. Punk grabs her by the shoulders and pushes her onto the table, and then she just lays on the table until he gets into the ring and climbs up to the top rope and throws the leg drop. And that was it. He didn't do any kind of setup moves, or it wasn't even a wrestling move. Just, okay, you over here now. Crash. All right.
I forgot he did that leg drop. And seeing that unlocked a bunch of memories, that was the thing he used to do.
Psychology.
I mean, I understand. Yeah.
Raven gets re-bloodied. They mentioned that he had been busted open in TNA recently and the night before or whatever. Oh, he hits a knee lift, and Gabe Sapolsky or Chris Lovey on commentary is like, oh, Mr. Wrestling 2 knee lift, Mr. Wrestling 2, Raven's favorite wrestler.
Yeah.
Who knew?
I guess Sapolsky
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, that seems odd to me, but okay. I guess, hey, man, you imprint on whoever you see growing up, right?
Yeah.
So...
Well, the internet wasn't that much of a thing, so he probably thought he could get away with it.
Raven also does the worst sharpshooter ever. I thought I had seen the worst sharpshooter before, but no, he does everything is wrong about this sharpshooter.
So Raven, instead of he picks up Punk's legs, and instead of putting his leg through the middle and then out to hook, the right leg, he crosses over to hook, over Punk's left leg. Now you still can do the sharpshooter if you do that. If you hook your opponent's legs around your leg and then turn the opposite direction. But that's not what Raven did. He then turned the way he would normally turn, and the body under him twisted into a position that you can't get into the sharpshooter because you're doing it wrong. And he just went with it.
He just held the legs there around his ankle.
She should have just transitioned into the STF or something.
Right.
Whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was like, and that was his whole, like, the way the announcer sold it was like, that was his spot. Like, oh, wow, you never knew that Raven could do a wrestling move like that.
Yeah.
It's like,
well,
no, he cannot.
I mean.
So anyway, then we move towards the finish as Punk hits the Raven effect, or as I knew it, the even flow DDT.
Yeah, the even flow DDT.
And the devil lock, which is really just the lasso from El Paso.
Well, I mean, Punk needed a hold, so he started doing that for a while. I like how Sapolsky understood it was called the devil lock, which is like a Misfits reference, and the other commentator didn't and was like, yes, the devil's lock. It's like, no, and Sapolsky would say it over and over again, the devil lock, he's got him in the devil lock. It's like, yes, the devil's lock there. Yeah.
I kind of miss Punk doing that,
you could use a hold.
Yeah.
That's not, I mean, he switched to doing the Anaconda Vice, which is fine.
The problem, even at this point, though, is a hold like that, you need a decent amount of like upper body strength to hold both of the guy's legs up, and Punk never quite had that. Like, he can do it on a smaller guy, but even with Raven, like, he was kind of struggling. Anyway, he doesn't win it with the devil lock the first time. Raven escapes, and then he bumps the ref. He like clotheslines the ref. Is like, oh well, I clotheslined the ref. And then Raven hits his drop toe hold to the chair, but there's no ref. Punk hits the low blow and gets the devil lock, and Raven finally taps. Punk demands a handshake, saying to the crowd, you all like this bullshit, don't you? Right? Because
that's the code of honor.
Punk is still... So I thought that was interesting, because Punk is sort of representing what would be the Ring of Honor ethic, but he's still the heel, so he also has to mock it.
Was that the first time that the Code of Honor was kind of weaponized like that?
Where he actually shook his hand, and then Punk went for the attack?
Well, I mean, even using it as a heel thing, like, no, we got to do this, right? You gotta respect me.
I think Christopher Daniels did it beforehand, but not with this kind of intensity.
I see, because I remember him when it was a prophecy. They were
for just refusing to do it.
Right?
Refusing.
Yeah, this might be.
Maybe
it might be, which would make sense for Punk to be the guy to do that for sure. Yeah, so he goes for it. So Raven shakes his hand. Punk attacks. Raven reverses, and he's going to do the even flow, but the ref blocks it. Punk scurries out, and then the ref gets DDT'd.
Yeah.
And that's the end of the first match between Punk and Raven. Is Punk defeated Raven in his ROH debut, and this kicks off this really long feud. They had quite a few matches. But the most famous of them...
They wanted to sell several DVDs off of this, and they did.
I remember we got the Best of CM Punk quite a while after this. We got the Best of CM Punk VHS they were putting out, and it was mostly this feud.
I mean, yeah, that's probably the best of what he did, huh?
Well, that's what people who had never heard of CM Punk before looking for a compilation were looking for, because this is what they'd heard of.
That and a bunch of promos, most of which I wasn't able to find before this episode. Like, there's some great promos in ROH where Punk's like, you all believe in a God I know doesn't exist.
Right.
And stuff like that.
No, the one that you did find is probably the most famous one.
Right. So it was after one of the matches with Raven, I think.
Yeah.
It's from June 28th, 2003. And Punk is bloody backstage with Colt Cabana and Daphne. And he tells this story about why he's straight edge. because of his drunk dad, who he sees as being basically the same as Raven, right? And that's why he's straight edge. This is true. This is real. This is straight edge. Though I think he revealed later on that his dad wasn't really all that bad. Like his dad. I
don't think he has much of a relationship with his parents.
Yeah.
And I'm also sure he thought it was worse than it was when he was a teenager, because that's your whole world.
Yeah. But it's an intense promo, and I believe when we first saw that shit, like it was like, that makes sense,
Well,
yeah, that was something that definitely stuck out to me, because he the intensity and the fire that he had on there was like, oh yeah, this isn't just a guy doing a job. This isn't a character. No, right. He's about this life. Like, fantastic.
The one thing that he said that's always been that always kind of stuck in my mind is how he's angry at Raven for the stuff that he hasn't even earned yet.
For being given the stuff that he hasn't even earned yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, even when I do achieve greatness, it's still gonna be detrimental because of your advantages. Yeah,
and what you've thrown away, what you had, and what you've thrown squandered.
away. Yeah.
He was talking about that sweet creative job he had in WWF, right?
Who the hell knows, man?
Maybe. Yeah.
I mean, that was something he just threw away that he probably should have kept.
Yo, I love Johnny Polo, man.
Yeah. Well, the thing about the Raven Shoot interview is, like, you hear the crazy stories, but you also hear about that, how when he was Johnny Polo, they were like, well, let's just give you a job in creative. And he's like, and he would talk about how they thought it was like a 50-hour-a-week job, but it was more like a 15-hour-a-week job. So he'd wake up at 9 a.m. He'd call the studio and tell them he was going to be at the office all day. Then he'd call the office and tell them he'd be at the studio all day. Then he'd go back to bed. And he'd still get done what they wanted him to get done, but
imagine how much cooler it might have been if he had actually thrown himself into the job.
Right. Right.
But he was probably already,
Well, he liked going out on the town with young Shane McMahon, which also didn't help his office staff.
That explains a lot.
Amazing.
There you go.
He also was Scotty Flamingo in WCW. In the early 90s. And I remember one time I was talking to my uncles around, the time I discovered Ring of Honor. It's like, yeah, Raven's there. He's doing all these crazy things. And they even mentioned that he was Scotty Flamingo, which I didn't know. That was something really wild. And I could see my uncle's brain like stop for 5 seconds, because he's an old school wrestling fan. He's like, I remember that guy. What the hell happened to him? I'm like, I don't know, man. Raven got Raven.
He started listening to Pearl Jam, and that
right.
That corrupted him.
That'll get you into I don't know, being homeless.
I
guess.
Really the tamest of the grunge bands,
I suppose, yeah.
So anyway, this brings us to what probably the most famous match of this feud, which was the dog collar match at the aforementioned Death Before Dishonor on July 19th, 2003. And Doc, you and I, we talked about the Punk Jimmy Rave dog collar match on one of the premium episodes, and for some reason forgot about this one, even though it is by far the more famous.
Well, it's because we were at the Punk Jimmy Rave one,
right?
And it made a big impression on us. And then this is one we saw on tape,
right?
Which was more famous, but not to us.
Yeah, and though it was at the Rexplex, which was the venue that we first saw Ring of Honor at, but this was a good year before we started watching Ring of Honor. But notable about the Rexplex, and Punk cuts a promo talking about it, is that they do not serve alcohol there. And Punk is very pleased about that. He points out that it must be very difficult for the audience. And they start chanting, alcohol, alcohol. It's perfect.
Oh, God. Just fucking great.
Punk also asks, where did being extreme ever get you, Raven? Or any of the other ECW guys? And calls out, of all people, Danny Doring, who's out there, who somehow got himself a beer and is pounding it in the crowd.
When I think extreme, I think Danny Doring.
Well, I'll defend the use of Danny Doring here. If you were a latter-day ECW fan, which at the time was not an unreasonable ask in 2003, if you were watching ECW in 2000, Danny Doring was a player. You know, him and Amish Roadkill ended up being the tag team champions. He was I don't want to say he was a big-time act, but he was a player in ECW for a few years there, and he was a star on the rise whose star got kind of snuffed out when ECW got snuffed out. The WWE wasn't really interested in him, and then that was kind of the end of it, you know?
Yeah.
That's kind of weird, though, because, I mean, he had the look that they would go for at the time,
they got so many guys.
Isn't his old
True.
tag team partner like your uncle or something, Doc?
No relation. No relation. We could see the
Oh.
pictures, but no relation.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's you guys can figure that one out.
Oh, God.
I wonder if Googling would
Oh
solve
yeah,
that,
definitely.
solve that
I actually
mystery
recently posted on my Twitter my very first promo pic because that was a thing that was going around, and you know, I mean, unlike a lot of the guys, at least I didn't look like a small child like some people do in their first promo pics.
Yeah, you just spent some time in Lancaster.
Some guys who still look like that.
You spent a few years in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Something like that, by way of Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So Danny Doring's drinking a beer, and CM Punk says, mentions that beer will never touch my lips. And if you know anything about how wrestling works, you should be able to guess where this is all going.
You really should.
Then the video that's on YouTube, which is, I don't know, from the Honor Club or whatever, cuts to Raven in the dog collar, and Punk wants to get out of it. He suggests, why don't we have a bunkhouse match?
Right. Why don't we have a bunkhouse match?
How are bunkhouse matches different than like Raven Rules matches
Street
versus
fights.
hardcore matches?
Well, there isn't a dog
Extreme
collar
rules.
involved.
Well, yeah, no. Bunkhouse.
I mean, if there's no rules, couldn't you still use a dog collar as a weapon?
But the ref isn't going to come and put it on you.
Yeah.
But if you take some initiative and put it on him,
any match could become a dog collar.
Just gotta dare to dream, you know?
Absolutely. But it's interesting about dog collar match. We pointed this out when we talked about the Jimmy Rave one. There haven't been a lot of famous dog collar matches. There haven't been many notable ones at all.
Right. There have been a few.
There were,
but
yeah. There's the Roddy Piper, Greg Valentine one from Starrcade '83.
Right.
There's the Pitbulls and
Eliminators.
Public Enemy?
Wasn't it the Eliminators?
What's that? Oh,
Is that a different match?
Hold on. I'm gonna get to the bottom of this right now. I always forget. ECW double dog collar match was Public Enemy and the Pitbulls. Saturn and Chris Jericho had one in WCW. Apparently, according to what just came up when I Googled. I was not aware of that one.
I think dog collar matches are really underrated.
Then there's these two with CM Punk in Ring of Honor. And then after that, there's Brody Lee and Cody Rhodes. And that's it, right? Or have they done another one since then? Oh,
CM Punk MJF.
Yeah, Punk MJF.
Of course. CM Punk MJF, right. Yeah, but that's still only like half a dozen.
I think AEW wants to do them like not often but regularly.
Yeah. Which,
like, kind of like a block to the feud, kind of like, how it should be used.
I hope they don't use them too much. The two that they've done were great. Made a lot of sense.
They were proper.
Especially the Punk MJF one made a lot of sense since it harkened back to this match that we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like that there haven't been that many. It makes them more special. And because they do feel more dangerous than other hardcore matches. Like having that chain. There's a part towards the end of the match, where like Raven just like yanks on the chain and CM Punk bumps. And that could go really wrong really easily.
When Raven was on the bleachers and Punk pulled the chain, pulling him from the top bleacher to the bottom, like, he had a very, very little wiggle room there to not, really,
Yeah.
really
Yeah,
mess
he
himself up. But like you heard on the climb up the chain's noise, like the weight of it dragging up
yeah.
there. I kind of establishes the chain as something that's that little
Yeah, like
extra in there.
Dangerous steel.
Raven hit his knees
Mhm.
on the bottom bleacher, which in a way was like one of the
Ah,
better ways that could have gone, because it
Yeah.
stopped his momentum before he hit the floor. He didn't hit his face, or I don't know. It was
eh.
a rough spot for sure.
When they first went in the crowd too, I saw somebody had a Paul London shirt where it's just his name written in the corn font.
Oh really? Oh wow. I
Wow.
noticed the
Yeah,
Please
that
Don't Die shirt, which I always wanted but could never find
Yeah.
one.
yeah.
Wow, but I don't think I'd ever noticed the corn one.
That might be up there for some of the worst wrestling shirts I've ever seen.
I mean, band logo, but your name is very hit or miss.
Yeah. I mean, especially when you got more than four
Right.
letters there. Um, I also noticed that this is when like the peak Ring of Honor I remember where they got they still have those guardrails, but
Hell
they have the
yeah.
metal
The-
signs.
Those were great
Yes,
and
those
dangerous.
Yeah. Yes. I'm surprised that you don't see that anywhere else though. Like,
Yeah, because they're dangerous.
Yeah, but
fair enough. But like you would think a deathmatch company would be like, "Hey, can we get those on the cheap?" You
Maybe
know?
they can't. But yeah, maybe.
but
maybe.
but they were great for original audio muted.
Yeah.
For
Original audio muted.
for Punk's theme song, Miseria Cantara by AFI,
Yeah.
where the crowd could like slam the thing along. There were several theme songs that had that feature, that had some rhythmic element.
None of which Ring of Honor have the rights to use in any
Right.
of their media.
Right. So if they have to show a clip with the music, they have to mute it entirely on
Yeah.
YouTube, which is unfortunate.
It's quite a shame.
Yeah.
But what were you going to say about the guardrails, Zach?
No, it's just those guardrails, those signs. I remember that, like the fans slapping on the signs as hard as they can when they were losing their minds over
Yeah.
something. I always thought that was, and again, another thing that set them apart. Having the ring that was the two colors, running diagonally, the long pads on the turnbuckles were all things I was seeing for the first time. I was like, oh,
And that
this is
classic kind of like, I don't know, medieval looking ROH logo.
Yeah.
that was better than the one that came after, the one that was all like the half circles
Yeah,
stuck
I'll
together.
agree with you there. I prefer both older logos from the kind of half circles.
Yeah,
one.
I like the one that came in between, the more like impact font,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term. Yeah, that's our era of ROH is really what came right after this, 2004 to 2008, really. And the ROH titles were so beautiful. I'm glad they brought those back recently.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I also like how Punk picks up the mic and tries to cut a promo in the middle of this match too. and
That he does.
And like Raven pulls him off the top rope by the chain and starts punching him, and Punk keeps trying to talk while Raven is punching him until like several punches in when he finally drops the mic. It's fantastic.
It's his primary activity.
Yeah. And and going all the way to WWE where, he promoed during the Royal Rumble.
Right. Oh, he could do that whenever. It's a skill. It's definitely a skill.
Yeah, he's like a bard, It's going to demoralize
Speaking
the
of
enemies.
Scotty Flamingo, Punk refers to him as Flamingo
Yeah.
during this part of the match. So yeah, Raven hits him with many clotheslines during the comeback.
Yes.
I didn't count them, but there were a lot. Like
More than the usual two.
More than the usual two, yeah. And then Paul Turner gets an unprotected chair shot to the head. Paul Turner, the referee.
Right to the dome.
That's when that thing with the chain happens, where he pulls him by the neck. And then Raven hits the Raven effect, but again, no ref.
No
for
ref.
Raven. No ref. But
Never any ref.
yes, and this time we get a parade of interference here. First, Colt Cabana low blowing Raven and DDTing him on the chair. Cabana looked so thrilled to be DDTing Raven on the chair.
Yeah.
Like, he was marking out for that.
Definitely.
He did the pose
he was like
and
a kid
everything.
at Christmas.
And then Doring comes out and takes out Cabana, but then Punk just still gets the pin. I didn't quite understand those particular beats. You know?
Well, Doring had to take Cabana out of the picture, but once that all happened, Raven still had been DDT'd.
A long time ago at this point, though. All right.
Yeah, they have to set up the next match.
I was feeling like
Search
there needed to
money.
be one, like Punk needed to do like one more thing to him right there, but whatever. In any case, that's when original audio is muted. Punk ties Raven to the bottom rope and pours beer on him, sending him back to rehab. So the idea was Raven was sober and Punk was knocking him off the wagon by pouring the beer on him. But then Tommy Dreamer shows up in a Hooters baseball jersey.
Yep.
Okay, I wasn't the only one that noticed that. Like, that's a bold choice, even in 2003.
It's crazy seeing Tommy Dreamer in 2003 and being like, damn, he looks so young.
You're right.
Because
it's like, oh yeah, it was almost 20 years ago, right?
I forget that this is only like 5 years. Not even.
Yeah.
It's like 2 years after ECW folded, right?
Yeah.
It's like 5 years after Dreamer and Raven's big feud in ACW, or 6 years or something like that.
You know, the whole Doring thing worked very well to, you know, throw off the scent of, you know, someone like Tommy Dreamer or a bigger ECW star coming in. Because it's, okay, we're bringing in one of Raven's guys, Danny Doring. Oh, yeah, Danny Doring, ECW. Then Tommy Dreamer shows up, Mr. ECW. And, yeah. DDT's Punk.
People go insane for it.
Oh, yeah, Tommy's so popular.
They tie Punk to the rope, or he ties Punk to the rope, unties Raven, and then of course, Raven and Tommy Dreamer shake hands and hug, which is notable in and of itself. You know, they were continuing their story.
Right.
From ECW.
Yeah, that feud, I mean, when you think of Tommy Dreamer or Raven in ECW, you think of them just wailing on each other, you know?
For years.
And they hadn't really revisited that in any promotion before this, I don't think.
I don't think so, no.
MLW, maybe?
Maybe.
Was
you would know.
MLW there yet? Maybe.
Well, I would have to look at it, because I know MLW also ran back the CM Punk Raven feud around that time.
Dreamer
became a hot feud.
Dreamer wasn't in TNA back then, was he?
I don't know.
Nah, maybe in and out, but TNA at that point didn't have an issue with people working around other places.
Yeah, that would become a problem later. Rob Feinstein was still in the mix here.
Yeah. Let's not make a mistake. He was the problem.
Right.
You know.
So
Dreamer and Raven celebrate. They pour beer all over CM Punk.
Yeah, the crowd is chanting chug, and they pour.
Punk sells it like he's being doused in acid.
Right. Yeah, and that was the big payoff. He had said, beer has never touched my lips, and by the end of that, it had.
At the very least, yes. Yes.
And the crowd was so happy that this fucking asshole had... Nowadays, man, like, it doesn't read that well nowadays.
No,
you know?
No part of it does, but, you know, times have changed.
Yeah.
It's really that simple.
Now it's like, that is an extremely abusive thing. I mean, of course, Punk was being abusive first. Right. But
heaven forbid a wrestling character abuse another one.
I know.
Right.
I that's all I think about when I watch all of this early Punk shit is like, damn, you can't get heat like that anymore.
No. But that's like, most of the time when people say that, it's like a lament, like, oh, yes, you can't get heat anymore. It's like, no, you have to get heat tailored to the modern audience. That's, you know, you couldn't have gone in front of an audience in the 70s and say the stuff that you could say in the year 2000 either, because you'd get arrested and run out of town.
And you know, it's that's the art of it, right? Like, it was easy, man. Like, the shit that Punk was saying in IWA Mid-South, that was easy. You know, low hanging fruit.
Right.
But isn't it just like the next step up from like what Ravishing Rick Rude would used to say when he was getting heat on an audience, he would
Yeah.
call them all,
Yeah.
disgusting fat pigs. And it's just the next vulgar step up there. And then you got a guy like MJF who's just has these targeted
Right.
roasts now, and there'll be somebody that'll go past him, and then
I gotta
you
say,
get like the
go full circle,
Dudleys in
somebody gets stabbed again.
ECW, you know.
yeah, but
Yeah.
you don't have. That was the only time I ever saw someone put a vest on someone that said "Help retarded children."
Yes.
Why did
I
he
don't
have
know,
that?
but he set the whole thing up.
Yep.
He came in and
That was
yeah,
problematic.
yeah.
Oh boy.
The ring announcer made a big deal about his opponent. I don't remember who his opponent was in that match. Jerry Lynn.
Is it Jerry Lynn?
Coming to IWA Mid-South, and Punk was like, "What? Him? What about I haven't been here in 4 months. Why aren't you talking about my big return?"
Right.
I mean, it's Jerry Lynn, no? I mean, come on now.
Yeah,
It's
we're
fucking Jerry
promoting
Lynn.
someone else,
Oh,
buddy.
Fantastic. Yeah, so good though. So, I mean, I'm not, whatever. I'm not a huge advocate of using that word, but it was pretty funny. Yeah, Jerry Lynn. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
We shouldn't really refer to him at all.
Going back to the end of that collar match too. At the end, when CM Punk is getting doused with beer, he let out the Darth Vader "No" at the end of the match. I was like,
Definitely.
Nice. Yeah.
I've seen that before.
It's the best.
Excellent. He is that kind of geek to throw that shit in. Okay. So Ring of this feud got a lot of buzz in Ring of Honor. Kind of put Ring of Honor on the map in a lot of ways. Put CM Punk on the map. Meanwhile,
Concurrently.
so. Well, the specific match we're talking about, I think, happened after the ROH feud was already done.
Yeah.
But it had been, I don't know, Zach, what exactly is the timing on this? So as Zach and Doc both pointed out, this feud between Punk and Raven was a hot feud that other promotions picked up. But NWA-TNA, as it still was,
NWA-TNA,
decided to use Punk and Raven together in a different kind of way. So, Zach, do you remember what the kind of the contours of the whole storyline between the two of them in TNA?
Okay, so all of this is setting up towards when I first started watching the weekly pay-per-views with my brother.
What
it was
up,
around
Jared?
the time that Raven came in.
Yeah.
I'll tell him he said hello. And Raven's whole thing was about his destiny, reclaiming what he should have had, getting on the straight and narrow and moving forward. And so the entire thing was, Jeff Jarrett.
His
being
destiny
Jeff
is also
Jarrett
winning the
and
NWA
saying,
World title. Right, yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And Jarrett was just saying, well, if you're going to do this, you got to go through X, Y, Z, 9, 12, 15. But he slowly assembled people that were like-minded to help fight with him, which would be Julio Dinero. That was the first time I seen him. I never really heard of him after this run there.
And this was
CM
the
Punk.
Gathering, right? Which was because they couldn't be the Flock, which was his
Right,
old
I guess
WCW unit.
They couldn't be the Gathering of the Juggalos either, because CM Punk.
right. Not that Gathering. Yes. All right. So it was Punk and Dinero were the Gathering.
Oh, I could have sworn that there was somebody else. Alexis Lurie was part of it.
Who would later become Mickey James, for those of you who don't know in our audience, a few years later when she signed with WWE.
There was also the one other issue with this thing. So if I'm not mistaken, this is around the time that CM Punk had issues with Teddy Hart.
Oh boy, Teddy Hart.
So they just made they brought in Punk to be Raven's lackey. They brought in Punk to be fucking Stevie Richards.
He was going to be part of his Deadpool, his flock, his stable that he has in just about every single place.
Yeah, the whole Raven gimmick is requires that pretty much.
So this brings us to NWA-TNA pay-per-view 75 on December 17th, 2003, where we have this match. It's a steel cage match between Raven Punk and Julio Dinero against Abyss and the red shirt security of Kevin Northcutt and Joey Legend, who I also had never heard of before this.
Yeah.
I forgot these people existed until I watched this match, and I was like, oh yeah. Also, Don Callis looks like an older version of Beavis.
He really does.
Right, so
he still kind of does.
He's there with Abyss and the red shirts, and then Jeff Jarrett and a Disco Inferno come, and they're talking about how Eric Watts, if they win this match, then Eric Watts will have almost too much power, or will be right of. First of all, Eric Watts, how is he an authority figure? Why does he? I guess because
was Bill Watts booking?
I'm almost certainly. Almost certainly,
I hope
right?
not.
It's got to be.
Actually, during this time, I think Vince Russo was part of it, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Because that would be around the time of Sports Entertainment
and the
Extreme.
Harrises, who we see later on.
Oh God, yeah.
So I mean, this is just a perfect example of the worst of TNA. But before we get to that, so they do a Raven and Punk and Dinero have a promo where only Raven talks. Right? They have CM Punk, and they make him a quiet lackey, a speechless lackey.
You know, they were the only people that like really ever used Punk after IWA Mid-South that didn't treat him like something special.
Yeah, and that was pretty dumb of them. Meanwhile, Raven's talking about how he's going to take the two sections of the cage and snap Abyss's neck off.
Right.
That also means that steel cage really isn't particularly put together. I mean, during the match, that thing looked like it was held together with zip ties and good vibes.
The match itself was nothing. I mean, it was a bunch of people hitting each other with stuff.
Yeah.
With very little rhyme or reason. You know,
Mike Tenay and Don West just, yelling.
Screaming about everything. And there was
all
no
the
structure.
Time. So
they set up some tables.
So yeah, the first several minutes are just Abyss and the red shirts bloodying Raven's crew with weapons, including they mentioned that Northcutt has a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but it doesn't look like he can move his legs individually, really.
Yeah.
Joey Legend, actually, I looked up to see where these guys were. Northcutt retired a while ago. Joey Legend still wrestles in Germany.
Oh, well, good for him.
Yeah.
They mention halfway through the match the stipulation that if Raven loses, he won't get another title shot. They say that once halfway through the match.
That seems important,
Yeah.
I wish I could tell you that the finish was when Disco Inferno comes in with the bolt cutters to try and get in. Before we get to the finish, there's no, hold on.
Okay.
Because this wasn't
That's not the finish. That's a halfway point.
I wish I could tell you this was the finish.
Well, okay.
You want to say something?
No, go ahead.
All right, so I wish I could tell you that the finish was when Disco Inferno, as Gilberti, tries to come in with bolt cutters to cut the chain, but he's chased off by Eric Watts, which opens the door for Jeff Jarrett to come in and try and get in the cage, who is then chased off by AJ Styles.
Don't forget Kid Cash, who was apparently there even though we barely saw him on camera.
I heard the announcers say Kid Cash.
And the Harris brothers chase him off. They were there too.
And the Harris brothers chase him off. And then Jarrett backs up into Sting, who beats him up.
Wait, before that, Jarrett climbs the cage and throws handcuffs in.
Yeah,
and then AJ Styles is suddenly there, punching Jarrett to the back, and then Sting shows up.
I did mention AJ Styles.
The already being punched Jarrett.
Yes, I said some of that.
Okay.
But there were so many people running in for various reasons. They had to do like 4 angles in 30 seconds in the middle of this match. And all of that was not the finish.
But in the middle of all the shit with Jarrett, Punk elbow drops Abyss through 2 tables.
Yeah, he sure is beating up Abyss really bad.
And when Sting and AJ are beating up Jarrett, they both stinger splash him against the cage. But AJ overshoots by quite a bit and seems to injure his leg on the cage.
Yeah, if you're familiar with AJ Styles today and how incredible of an athlete he is, and you're not familiar with his early work, remember he's 45 now. Like, imagine him when he was in his early 20s, and what kind of springs he had under him.
So there's still a bunch of shit to happen, but I wanted to mention earlier that the baby faces have like a really hokey synchronized comeback that's mostly super kicks, which these days is like, you know, AEW
and discus lariats.
Sure.
Discus lariats, yes. But I just gotta mention Don West's comment here. They don't need garbage cans. They don't need chains. They're just going to use the feet that God gave them.
On those tables.
Well, later then they would. They
and
immediately
I'm sure they
started
used
using
the other
weapons,
stuff. You know.
Yeah, that was the whole point. Oh my God.
So okay,
TNA.
so after all the stuff with Jarrett and Sting and AJ and the Harris
and
brothers
Kid
Cash and Disco Inferno
and Eric Watts
the red shirts are handcuffed by the handcuffs that Jarrett had thrown in the ring.
Right.
But Abyss still manages to hit the Black Hole Slam on Raven. I miss when that move was called the Black Hole Slam.
Yeah, that was a good name.
Now it's because it's Deep Six now because Corbin. So then there's a bunch of concertos, and Raven's about to hit the Raven effect, but then Punk and Dinero, surprise, swerve after fighting this, grueling match where they got bloodied by shit and whatever. Oh, they were in on it the whole time. Punk and Dinero, concerto, Raven, and put Abyss on top for the win. And Mike Tenay doesn't get it.
No.
And neither do I, Mike.
I do not.
No one gets it.
Why would you go into a fight knowing you're going to get absolutely slaughtered, and then at the end, we don't need to win now.
And, like they were beating up Abyss in the red shirts so badly too, through the tables and everything. They also
have no characters. They didn't cut a promo earlier. They didn't say anything. No. We have no reason. They do
Raven's pose over him.
All they are his lackeys. There's been no character built to explain their actions or to make anyone care about them.
Mike Tenay.
I mean, I'm still not 100% sure who Julio Dinero is. I mean, he showed up there and then he disappeared into the ether. I mean,
Don West and Mike Tenay are talking as though they had just like killed a baby in the middle of the ring. They are so offended at this turn that these guys are such bastardly the words aren't even coming to me.
That they would interfere with this, destiny that Raven is supposed to have, right?
Right, that Raven, that bastion of goodness, Raven.
Oh man! So yeah, that's how they used fucking Raven and CM Punk in TNA. Gravy. The hottest feud in the indies, it's such a clear example of, just
of TNA
of like what can be made well or what can be great in wrestling and what can be shitty using kind of the exact same ingredients.
This is the only time I've ever seen CM Punk be just another guy.
Yeah.
Like, even in the WWE, when he wasn't being used on top, he always had, like, an aura about him,
And he had been in TNA for a little while at this point, right, Zach?
He's showed up a couple, maybe like 10 or 20 pay-per-views before. Didn't stick around much after. Like I said, there was that whole thing with Teddy Hart, who, again, didn't stick around much
thereafter. That happened
thereafter.
In TNA? The beef between Punk and
Hart? Post TNA, they ended up fighting at some sort of diner. According to Teddy Hart, he heroically dominated CM Punk. According to CM Punk, he just slapped him around a bit, then it was broken up. Yeah. I don't know who to believe. I'm gonna default to CM Punk because
in the days where everyone in the diner wouldn't have had their phone out recording,
Yeah,
you got these kinds of legends. So
I think it's the same diner that a lot of those TNA guys would go to afterwards. I'm pretty sure there's the Hardy Boys cutting a promo on CM Punk in that same diner, if I'm not mistaken. Where it's like a shoot promo where Jeff Hardy was talking about putting over CM Punk and making him a star, kind of slurring his words. Yeah, not good times.
Not so good, no.
Oh, there's a lot of things I did like about early TNA, but it seems like as long as you just ignored the main event card, unless AJ Styles is there, you're pretty much good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just kind of how WCW was toward the end too, right?
You know,
yes, very much.
Down to the AJ Styles.
It's interesting. AEW is like the opposite. Like the main events are often great, and then there's just a bunch of other shit on the card.
There's so much shit on the card. You know that.
Yeah, they got to space it out a little bit.
It's hard. They signed so many guys.
I mean, if for the sake of Excalibur not dying at the commentary booth, trying to explain the entire week's stuff in about 5 seconds, I feel bad for him, you know?
To sum things up here a little bit, so yeah, CM Punk was the superstar for this change in ethics, change in mentality of wrestling fan, of culture at large to some degree for this period. And for me, it was great. It became really important later on, actually, when like our favorites started dying off. You know, that there was a guy who wasn't just going to kill himself from taking too many steroids or like, you know, or
drugs and alcohol
or anything like that. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
No, and instead he thought he was unhealthy backstage, and they were like, "You're fine." And he's like, "I'm leaving."
Right, yeah.
I'm not going to end up like those other guys.
Yeah, and so, you know, Doc and I started watching Ring of Honor about a year after Death Before Dishonor, the Raven match, and instantly Punk pretty much became my favorite there. Shortly before Bryan Danielson became my favorite.
It's a whole other story.
But yeah, and Punk had this incredible run. We're gonna cover the whole Summer of Punk thing where he wins the ROH title and threatens to bring it to WWE with him because he's already signed and all that stuff. We're gonna cover that in a different sort of way later on. But
sure.
When we next talk about CM Punk, it will be under the WWE umbrella, and how the character that CM Punk had built on the indies did not, at first at least, really gel with the WWE product.
I remember that promo, the ECW promo, where it's just like, oh, that's what they're gonna do.
My addiction is wrestling.
Yeah, it's competition. And we'll get into all that. But Zach,
maybe you have a gambling problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Zach, any last thoughts about CM Punk, Ring of Honor, this period of wrestling, anything like that?
I think this period of wrestling really highlights one of the things that I did like in pro wrestling is that, you know, you find, you know, your guy and you get to see them grow and evolve. It's just with indie wrestling, you get to see them in all these different facets presented in all these different ways. And that's one of the, you know, it's only gotten better as time goes on. Like, you know, you can look at IWTV as a great example. I could see a guy like Hoodfoot or Akira, and I see how they've grown and just to take it on different styles or presented in different ways. And you know, someday those guys will go on to do, you know, bigger and better things, or go on to do keep on presenting themselves in different ways. And it's always cool to see that growth. So it's the same thing that you can latch onto, but it's not the same thing day in, day out, which is, you know, sometimes I can get fatigued from watching WWE or New Japan or, you know.
I get fatigued watching any WWE. The pay-per-views. I'm probably gonna watch Hell in a Cell tonight.
Yeah, well, while we've been recording this, I've had Hell in a Cell on muted, kind of behind the screen, and you know, it's on. I've barely been paying attention to it. I've been recording. I mostly wanted to see if anything like huge was happening, and so far, nah.
Nothing ever happens.
Nothing ever happens. That's right.
Except that like WrestleMania at this point. Yeah. WrestleMania was great though.
Yeah. Oh, I really enjoyed WrestleMania.
That's good.
We did an episode about that already.
Yeah.
I am getting wary though of shows going too long or going multiple days in a row. They're too long because, for the big events, usually it's an excuse for me and my brother to barbecue and then, drink
Yeah,
ourselves
and if
silly.
you're doing that for 48
So-
hours straight, that becomes a problem.
Wrestle Kingdom
Oh my
ended
God.
this year. Really, Double or Nothing was
It
a
was
little rough because
long,
the
man. I didn't watch it all at once. I watched it.
yeah.
I didn't watch all of it. I skipped some matches.
Me and my brother went straight through. He fell asleep like halfway through the main event. I wasn't much after that, but
Word. Well, Zach, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I hope that you'll come back to talk about more of this stuff.
Do you have
future
anything to
episodes.
plug?
I have nothing to plug.
That's fine.
I don't have an active Twitter account. I just lurk.
Alright, no,
I
that's
don't really
fine.
have much to say.
That's fine. Thank you very much for coming on. One of the things that we do is that we like interviewing just wrestling fans, because that's where the real ideas are.
Yeah.
And it's cool to interview
absolutely,
like
man.
wrestlers and people in the business and all of that, but there's you get a different perspective from somebody that isn't bombarded with it from the inside all day, and I think that people inside need to check themselves on that a little bit, because wrestling is for the fans.
Yeah, and I think, Zach, you have a breadth of knowledge that I don't really know anybody, or I don't know a lot of people who know about, particularly during this period that we were talking about. And I'd also like to pick your brain a little bit more about World Class when you were growing up and stuff like that.
You can remember.
I'll try to. I would have to go back and watch the matches, because a lot of that stuff is just the memories were watching the TV, but also like my family around me at the time. My uncle, who I mentioned earlier, trying to smarten me up to this stuff. Like back in the day, he would put me onto like Legion of Doom, or saying, "Hey, the Von Erichs are pretty good." He would. When I first started watching ECW, he was saying, "Pay attention to Jerry Lynn. That guy's special." And it's like, okay, I like Sabu though, because he like rolls around in barbed wire and is not afraid of no one. And then as an adult, I still need to apologize to the man, because goddamn, dude.
Dude, it's crazy, like watching those great RVD Jerry Lynn matches and being like, wow, Jerry Lynn really made RVD's career. Like,
He really helped.
Like RVD his character was over and his character was great, but he never would have been thought of as a great wrestler, I don't think, without those Jerry Lynn matches.
Yeah.
I've also heard a lot of good things about his mid-90s run in Japan. Again, it's really hard to access that stuff outside of like the really, really big matches.
I imagine, yeah. Well, and I know there's some 1986 World Class on the WWE or on Peacock or whatever. So maybe we could dig into some of that later as well.
That'd be cool.
Absolutely.
So before we sign off, I would like to plug our Patreon. Patreon.com/contesting wrestling. We have over 100 other episodes out there where we're uploading them whenever we can. If it's $5 a month and you get access to all of that stuff, we go more in depth on a lot of the topics that we've discussed here on the main feed, and we do a bunch more. We also do kind of watch-alongs on whatever television shows we feel like, wrestling shows, Raw Year One, etc. And yeah, so check that out.
And we're gonna start doing a series. So I mentioned we're gonna do the original Summer of Punk from 2005 in a different kind of way. The plan is to watch all the ROH shows that were part of the Summer of Punk, one episode at a time. I think there's like 7 altogether.
Right. It wasn't that long. They weren't running that often.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again, Zach.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And for Doc Diamondfire,
you're welcome.
I'm Dr. Ben Abelson. Thank you for tuning in to Contesting Wrestling. We love you.
This has been Contesting Wrestling. Peace, everybody.
Peace.